Hey, you look hungry. Have some food.
Are these for me? Thank you.
Alice never thought a lunch of burger and chips could change her life. She had bought it for a stranger, a frail old man thrown out of a restaurant like garbage, his hands trembling with hunger. She didn't even have enough to feed herself and her little brother most nights, yet she handed him lunch, then her trust, then a place in her tiny home. Weeks later, that same old man sat frozen in her living room, staring at the son who had believed him dead for 5 long years. Tears cut through the dirt on his cheeks as he whispered, "Justin, it's me. It's your father." And all Alice could do was stand in the doorway, her heart racing, realizing that her single act of kindness had just pieced a family back together, and would soon change her world forever. Welcome back to Life in Stories, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments the time where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another story just as powerful and emotional as this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss it. The smell of leather and glue clung to Alice's childhood like a second skin. She could still remember the first time her grandfather placed a strip of worn hide in her 12-year-old hands, showing her how to stretch it flat across the workbench. His hands were weathered and knotted, strong from decades of bending over shoes, and his voice had carried the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "Shoes," he told her, holding up a pair of half-mended boots, "are a man's history. Every scuff is a road he's walked, every crack a story he's lived. When you fix them, you're not just stitching leather. You're giving someone back their steps." Alice hadn't understood it fully then. She only knew that when she pressed her small fingers against the shoe, following his guidance as he showed her how to thread the needle, she felt part of something bigger than herself. Her grandfather, Thomas, had raised her after her parents died in a car accident. He was more than just a guardian. He was her anchor, her teacher, and the closest thing she had to a hero. From the age of 12 to 18, her world revolved around the little cobbler's workshop that smelled of polish and faint tobacco, where sunlight cut in slanted lines across the floor and every day ended with her grandfather humming while he worked. But time has a cruel way of stealing pillars away. By the time Alice turned 18, Thomas's health had begun to decline. His once steady hands trembled as he held the awl, and the humming grew weaker. The day he didn't come down to the workshop at all, Alice knew. She sat by his bedside that night, holding his frail hand as he whispered his last lesson. "Don't stop, Alice. Keep making shoes. Keep walking forward. And look after Tyler." Then he was gone. Alice didn't get to grieve the way other teenagers did. There was no time for curling up in bed, no room for crying until the pillow was soaked. Tyler was only 6, too small to understand the permanence of death, but old enough to feel its absence. He needed her. So Alice became both sister and mother. She sold off what she could to pay rent, and when that ran out, she carried her grandfather's old wooden stool into the streets. With a handful of tools and a canvas bag, she began offering to fix people's shoes on the sidewalks. A scuffed heel here, a broken strap there. Pennies, nickels, the occasional dollar. It wasn't glamorous. Most days, she went home with more blisters on her fingers than coins in her pocket. Some people ignored her completely, walking by as if she were invisible. Others looked at her with pity, and a few with contempt, as though trying to earn an honest living on the street was something to be ashamed of. But every now and then someone would smile, sit on her stool, and let her work. "Can you mend these?" a woman once asked, holding out a pair of cracked leather loafers. "They were my husband's. He passed last year and I just can't throw them away." Alice nodded, her throat tight. She worked for hours on those shoes, refusing the woman's money at the end. "Some things," she said softly, handing them back, "are worth more than cash." Word spread. Slowly. Painfully. But people started to notice the girl on the corner who could bring old shoes back to life. A businessman asked if she could make him a custom pair. A nurse wanted durable flats. They were small orders, but to Alice they were seeds. Proof that maybe, just maybe, she could build something beyond survival. The years rolled on like cobblestones underfoot. By 25, Alice had scraped together enough savings, and enough faith, to rent a tiny storefront. It wasn't much. Peeling paint, a drafty backroom, a cracked display window. But when she hung the wooden sign that read Timothy and Company Shoes, a nod to her grandfather's name, she felt his presence there as though he were nodding in approval. Inside, the air carried the familiar tang of leather and polish, just like her childhood. She set up the old Singer sewing machine her grandfather had passed down, lined the shelves with scraps of hide, laces, and shawls, and opened the door to whoever might come. It was still a hard life. Rent gnawed at her profits, bills piled up like stubborn customers refusing to leave, and some weeks she had to choose between paying for supplies or buying enough groceries for herself and Tyler. But at least now she had a roof for her work and a name on the window. Tyler, at 13, was her shadow. Gangly and full of restless energy, he hated sitting still but loved being useful. He helped carry deliveries to nearby customers, fetched materials from suppliers across town, and sometimes watched her work with wide eyes. "Show me again how you stitch the sole," he'd say, leaning over the bench. "You'll poke your finger if you're not careful," Alice teased, but she always showed him. She couldn't deny the swell of pride when he tried to copy her movements, clumsy but determined. He had his grandfather's curiosity, and a spark of Alice's stubbornness. She knew he was still a child, but in her heart she could already see the man he was becoming. Strong, kind, and capable. Yet beneath the rhythm of daily work, a shadow always lingered. Alice carried the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, the gnawing fear that one bad month, one twist of fate, could topple everything. She kept those worries from Tyler, tucking them into the corners of her mind where he couldn't see. To him, she was just Alice, the sister who could fix anything. But in the quiet hours when the shop was empty and the lamp burned low, she would trace the grooves in her grandfather's old workbench and whisper, "I'm trying, Grandpa. I'm really trying." Life wasn't easy, but it was theirs. And for Alice, that was enough. At least, it had been. Until the day she stepped outside the shop, waiting for Tyler to come back from a delivery, and saw an old man being thrown out of a restaurant like yesterday's trash. He stumbled onto the sidewalk, thin and weary, his clothes tattered, his dignity shredded by the laughter of the waiter who shoved him out. People walked around him, muttering, some shaking their heads, others ignoring him entirely. Alice's chest tightened. She recognized the look of hunger on his face. She'd worn it herself too many nights to count. Without thinking, she marched into the restaurant, handed over what little cash she had left for the day, and carried out a burger and chips. When she placed it in his hands, his eyes brimmed with disbelief. "For me," he whispered. Alice nodded. No one should go hungry. She didn't know then that this small act, a meal she could barely afford, would unravel secrets buried in betrayal, reunite a broken family, and change her life forever. The paper bag was warm in Alice's hands, grease seeping through the corners where the burger nestled against the fries. She crouched on the sidewalk, the cracked concrete pressing into her knees, and held it out to the old man who had been thrown out of the restaurant moments before. He stared at her as though she had handed him a crown instead of food. His hair was a silver tangle, his face lined with the kind of wear that went deeper than age, and his eyes, sharp blue dulled by exhaustion, searched hers as if trying to find the trick. "For me?" he asked again, voice hoarse. "Yes," Alice said simply. "Eat." He hesitated, pride and hunger warring in the slump of his shoulders, before finally reaching for the bag. His hands shook as he unwrapped the burger, and the first bite made him close his eyes, as though it hurt to remember the taste of something warm. He devoured half of it before slowing down, as if ashamed of his own desperation. Alice sat beside him on the curb, her apron still dusted with leather scraps from the shop. People walked past, some giving curious glances, most ignoring them completely. She didn't care. "Thank you," he said finally, wiping his mouth with the back of his sleeve. His voice carried a rasp that spoke of too many nights in the cold. "It's been a while." Alice gave a small smile. "I could tell." They sat in silence for a moment. Then, quietly, she asked, "Do you have somewhere to go?" The old man's eyes flicked away. "Not anymore." Her stomach tightened. She should have left it there, should have nodded and gone back into her shop, told herself she'd done enough. She was barely holding things together for herself and Tyler. Money was thin. Food was rationed. And yet, something about him, the quiet dignity beneath his ragged edges, the way he chewed slowly now, as if savoring the last bites because he didn't know when the next would come, wouldn't let her walk away. "My name's Alice," she said instead, extending a hand. He looked at her as if no one had asked for his name in years. Then he took her hand, surprisingly firm despite the tremor. "Robert." "Well, Robert," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I can't promise much, but I've got a spare corner in my house if you need a place to sleep tonight." His eyes widened. "You'd do that? For me?" Alice shrugged. "I've been hungry before. I've been cold before. I know what it feels like. No one deserves to sleep on the street." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a shaky nod, he whispered, "Thank you. I don't know how to." "Don't," Alice interrupted gently. "Just come on." Tyler was the first to notice when they stepped through the door of their small apartment that evening. He dropped the bundle of shoeboxes he'd been carrying and froze, his dark hair falling into his eyes. "Who's that?" he demanded, pointing at Robert. Alice closed the door behind them. "This is Robert. He's a friend. He needed somewhere to stay tonight." Tyler narrowed his eyes. At 13, he was protective in a way that sometimes reminded Alice of their grandfather. Fierce and stubborn. "You brought a stranger here? What if he's dangerous?" Robert shifted uncomfortably, setting down the bag Alice had given him to carry. "I don't mean any harm, son. Just a warm place to rest." Alice placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "I know it's unusual, but he needed help. And we help when we can. Remember what Grandpa used to say." Tyler's mouth twisted. "Kindness costs nothing but means everything." "That's right." Tyler looked at Robert again, suspicious but softening. Finally, with a huff, he muttered, "Fine. But I'm keeping an eye on him." Robert gave a weary smile. "That's fair." That night, Alice set up a blanket and pillow on the couch. Their apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms and the cramped living area, but Robert sank into the worn cushions as though they were luxury. Alice brought him a glass of water. "It's not much," she admitted, "but you're welcome here for now." Robert's fingers curled around the glass. "You've already given me more than most people would. More than I deserve." Alice tilted her head. "You don't sound like someone who belongs on the street." For the first time, a flicker of something, pride? Shame? Crossed Robert's face. He looked down at the floor. "Things don't always turn out the way you expect." Alice didn't push. She just nodded and left him to rest, though curiosity burned in her chest. In the days that followed, Robert slipped into their lives in small but noticeable ways. He woke early, sometimes before Alice, and swept the kitchen floor without being asked. He carried supplies from the market when her arms were full. At the shop, he stood quietly at the workbench, watching her stitch with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "You're precise," he remarked once, as she guided a sole into place. Alice smirked. "Learned from the best." "Your grandfather?" She nodded. "He taught me everything." Robert's lips curved faintly. "He taught you well." It wasn't just idle compliments. He asked sharp questions. Why she used one type of thread over another, how she measured the balance of a sole. And when she struggled with the old sewing machine one afternoon, cursing under her breath as it jammed again, Robert leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Mind if I try?" Alice hesitated, then stepped back. Robert's hands were unsteady at first, but his movements grew surer as he opened the machine, examined the gears, and adjusted the tension. Within minutes, it hummed back to life smoother than it had in months. Alice blinked. "How did you?" He shrugged. "I've worked with machines before. Different kind, but principles are the same." Tyler, standing in the doorway, frowned. "For a homeless guy, you sure know a lot." Robert only smiled faintly and returned to his chair. That night, as Alice washed dishes, Tyler cornered her. "Why are you letting him stay? We don't even know him." Alice dried her hands on a towel, choosing her words carefully. "Because, Tyler, sometimes people just need someone to believe in them. And if Grandpa taught us anything, it's that kindness matters most when it costs us something." Tyler frowned, but after a moment he sighed. "Fine. But if he does anything weird, I'm telling you." Alice smiled. "Deal." She didn't say it aloud, but in her heart, she knew Robert wasn't just another lost soul. There was more to him, something deliberate in the way he spoke, in the way he fixed the machine, in the intelligence that flickered behind those tired eyes. She just didn't know yet how deep his story ran, or how much it would change. The days settled into a strange but steady rhythm. Alice would wake first, prepare a small breakfast for Tyler before he headed to school, and then unlock the shop. Robert, though he never said so, seemed determined to earn his keep. He swept the floors, ran errands when Tyler couldn't, and even started sketching designs on scraps of paper while Alice worked. At first, Alice dismissed the sketches as idle doodles. But one afternoon she paused mid-stitch when she noticed the detail. Not crude lines, but carefully measured outlines of shoe patterns, complete with notes about stitching angles and support points. "Where did you learn to draw like this?" she asked, picking up the sheet. Robert looked up from the stool where he sat polishing a pair of boots. His expression was unreadable. "Here and there. I've seen how things are built. Learned to appreciate precision." Alice studied the paper. The design wasn't just neat, it was innovative, cleaner than anything she'd seen in the catalog suppliers sometimes showed her. "This is good. Really good." Robert only shrugged, as if it meant nothing. But Alice knew better. People didn't draw like that by accident. That evening, after Tyler had gone to bed, Alice sat at the kitchen table across from Robert. The single bulb above them hummed faintly, casting a yellow glow over the worn tabletop. "You're not just some man who fell on hard times," Alice said softly. Robert's eyes flicked to hers, sharp despite the weariness in his face. He didn't speak at first, and for a moment Alice thought he would deflect again. But then he sighed, leaning back in his chair, his shoulders sagging as though carrying a weight too heavy for one man. "You're right," he said finally. "I wasn't always like this." Alice folded her arms on the table. "Then tell me, who were you?" His gaze drifted to the window, to the night pressing against the glass. "Once upon a time, I was a man people respected. A man with more money than I knew what to do with. A man who thought he'd built a life that couldn't be broken." Alice raised her brows. "A businessman?" Robert gave a hollow chuckle. "More than that. I was a billionaire." The word hung in the air, absurd and heavy. Alice blinked. You're saying you had billions? And now you're... Now I'm nothing, Robert cut in, voice sharp with self-loathing. Alice searched his face. He wasn't smirking, wasn't fishing for pity. His eyes burned with a truth that made her shiver. What happened? She asked quietly. He hesitated, then spoke with the careful precision of a man picking through shards of glass. My wife happened. Karen. I thought she loved me, truly loved me. But she loved the money, the power, the status. When she realized she could have all of that without me, she started weaving her web. Alice leaned forward. She forged documents, siphoned accounts, moved pieces I didn't even see coming. By the time I realized, she'd bled me dry. And then, she made sure no one would believe me. Staged an accident. Told the world I was dead. Alice's stomach turned. But your son. You said you had a son. Robert's face cracked at the mention, pain etching deeper lines into his features. Justin. My boy. My pride. His voice broke, but he forced himself to continue. She poisoned him against me long before the end. Told him I was cruel. That I didn't care. That every late night at the office was neglect, every business trip abandonment. She painted me as a monster, and when she told him I was gone, he didn't question it. Why would he? His mother had already convinced him I was the villain in his story. He bowed his head, hands trembling on the table. So I disappeared. No money. No proof. Just a name nobody believed in anymore. Alice's throat was tight. She wanted to deny it, to say it sounded too wild to be real. But the rawness in Robert's voice, the way his body seemed to cave under the weight of memory, silenced any doubt. You didn't deserve that, she whispered. Robert gave a bitter laugh. Deserve has nothing to do with it. I was a fool. I built empires but failed to see the rot growing inside my own home. They sat in silence for a long moment. Alice's mind spun. She thought of the sharp lines of his sketches, the way he fixed the machine with ease, the precision in his every word. He wasn't lying. He couldn't be. Finally, she reached across the table, her hand resting on his. Then we'll find a way. Somehow. You don't belong on the street, Robert. And Justin deserves to know the truth. His eyes lifted to hers, watery and disbelieving. You'd help me. After everything. Alice smiled faintly. You helped me today. You fixed the sewing machine when I was ready to throw it out the window. You helped Tyler carry boxes. You've done more in a week than some people do in a lifetime. So yes, I'll help you. Robert swallowed hard, his voice rough. You don't know what you're promising. Maybe not, Alice admitted. But I know this. No one deserves to be erased. For the first time since she'd met him, Robert's expression softened, the hard lines easing just enough for her to glimpse the man he once was. And in that moment, Alice knew, whatever it took, she would help him reclaim his name, and his son. Alice knew she couldn't rely on her little shop alone. Business in their quiet neighborhood trickled like a leaky faucet, enough to scrape by, never enough to get ahead. Robert encouraged her, gently but persistently, to look beyond. Take your shoes into the city, he said one morning as he watched her polish a finished pair. The streets there are full of people who care about quality. People who'd pay double for what you're making. Alice hesitated. The city meant competition, risk, rejection. But Robert was right. If she wanted to grow, she had to reach beyond the familiar. So one Saturday, she packed a cloth bag with samples. Sturdy boots, elegant flats, a pair of men's dress shoes she was particularly proud of, and caught the bus into the city. The noise hit her first. Honking horns, vendors shouting, the buzz of people rushing with purpose. She walked block after block, ducking into boutiques, showing her work to managers who smiled politely but shook their heads. By noon, her feet ached, her stomach grumbled, and her bag felt heavier than when she'd left. She stopped at a corner cafe to catch her breath. As she sat on the low stone ledge outside, she noticed a man a few feet away cursing under his breath as he fiddled with his shoe. He was well-dressed, crisp navy suit, sleek watch, the kind of presence that turned heads, but he was crouched awkwardly, tugging at a sole that had come loose. Without thinking, Alice reached into her bag. "I can fix that," she called. The man looked up, surprised. His eyes were a striking blue, sharp and familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. "Excuse me." "Your shoe," she said, pointing. "I'm a cobbler. I've got the tools. Won't take long." He raised an eyebrow, skeptical but amused. "You carry cobbling tools around with you?" Alice shrugged. Occupational hazard. Something in her confidence must have convinced him, because he sighed and slipped off the shoe, handing it over. "Fine. Impress me." Alice sat cross-legged on the pavement, pulling out her kit. Within minutes, she had the sole reattached, the stitching reinforced, and the polish smoothed to a near shine. She handed it back with a small grin. "Good as new." The man slipped it on, tested the fit, then looked at her with genuine surprise. "That's actually impressive." "Thanks." She wiped her hands on a rag, studying him more closely now. His face, his eyes, his jawline, it hit her like a jolt. She'd seen echoes of those features every day in Robert's weary face. Her breath caught. Could it be? "What's your name?" she asked almost too quickly. "Justin," he said, adjusting his cuff. "Justin Collins." Alice's heart pounded. Robert's son. It had to be. For a moment she said nothing, wrestling with the weight of what she carried. Then, carefully, she asked, "Do you know much about your father?" Justin's expression hardened instantly. "Why?" Alice hesitated. "Because I think I know him." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "That's impossible. My father's dead. Has been for years." Alice shook her head. "No. He's alive. He's been living with me and my brother. His name is Robert. He—" "Stop." Justin's voice was cold, his jaw tight. "I don't know what game you're playing, but don't. My mother told me everything about him. He was selfish, cruel. He abandoned us. And then he died. End of story." Alice's chest ached. "That's not true. He loves you, Justin. He never abandoned you. He was betrayed. Everything you've been told. It isn't what happened." Justin turned away, anger flashing in his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," Alice admitted. "But I know Robert. I've seen the man he is. He deserves a chance to tell you his side. That's all I'm asking. Just one conversation." Justin stood there torn. His hands flexed at his sides, his gaze fixed on the ground as if he were at war with himself. Finally, after a long silence, he muttered, "Even if what you're saying is true, why should I believe you?" Alice met his eyes. "Because I have nothing to gain. I'm not asking for money or favors. I'm just asking you to give your father a chance." Justin studied her, the skepticism in his expression softening just slightly. He exhaled slowly. "Where?" Alice's pulse leapt. She scribbled her address on the back of one of her shop cards and handed it to him. "We're there most evenings. Whether you come or not, that's up to you." He tucked the card into his pocket but said nothing more. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Alice sat back on the stone ledge, her heart racing. She didn't know if he'd come. She didn't know if he believed a word she'd said. But at least the seed was planted. And sometimes, seeds were all it took. The following week passed in slow, anxious drips. Every evening, Alice returned from the shop and glanced toward the street, half expecting a shadow at the end of the block, half dreading that Justin would never come. Robert never asked why she looked restless, though his eyes followed her with quiet knowing. Tyler, on the other hand, wasn't so discreet. "What's wrong with you?" he asked one night as they cleared the table. "You keep staring at the door like we're expecting a ghost." Alice forced a smile. "Maybe I am." Tyler groaned. "You're weird." But when she lay in bed later, staring at the cracked ceiling, her mind kept circling back to Justin. Would he believe her? Would he believe Robert? Or would he toss the card away and retreat into the comfortable lies his mother had spun? On Thursday evening, her question was answered. The low rumble of an engine outside drew her to the window. A sleek black SUV pulled up at the curb, its tinted windows glinting under the fading light. Tyler, who had been sprawled on the couch with his schoolbooks, shot up immediately. "Whoa," he whispered, his eyes wide. "That's not a car you see around here." The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped out. "Justin." Tyler darted to the door before Alice could stop him. He swung it open, planting himself in the doorway like a guard dog. His skinny 13-year-old frame looked ridiculous next to Justin's towering presence, but his voice came out steady. "Who are you and why are you here?" Justin studied him, one brow raised. "I'm looking for Alice Timothy." "Is this her house?" "Depends who's asking," Tyler shot back, arms crossed. Alice hurried forward. "Tyler, it's okay." She placed a hand on his shoulder, gently nudging him aside. "He's expected." Justin's eyes flicked to hers, then softened ever so slightly. He nodded once. "Come in." When Justin stepped across the threshold, the air in the room seemed to change. Robert, who had been sitting in the armchair with a book, looked up. For a heartbeat, his face was blank, as if his mind couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Then the book slipped from his hands and thudded to the floor. "Justin," he whispered. Justin froze. His jaw clenched. His eyes darted to Alice, then back to Robert. He took a cautious step closer, as though approaching a fragile thing. "You," his voice caught. He swallowed hard and tried again. "You look older," Robert finished, a shaky smile pulling at his lips. "Tired, but alive." For a long, unbearable moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Tyler glanced between them, sensing the gravity of what was happening but not fully grasping it. He tugged at Alice's sleeve. "That's him, isn't it? His son." Alice nodded. Justin let out a sharp exhale and shook his head. "I don't know what this is. I don't know if I should believe what I'm seeing." His voice cracked. "Because if you're really my father, then everything I've been told." "It was a lie," Robert said gently, his own voice trembling. "All of it. Your mother told you I abandoned you, that I didn't care. But I never left you, Justin. She made sure I couldn't come back." Justin's hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to argue, to defend the story he'd clung to for so long. But standing here, looking into Robert's eyes, the same winter blue as his own, he couldn't deny the flicker of recognition, the flood of memories buried deep. His father's laugh, the way he used to carry him on his shoulders, the smell of leather from his study. Things he'd forced himself to forget. "Do you know what it's like?" Justin said, his voice raw. "To spend your whole life hating someone you thought abandoned you? To grieve and resent at the same time?" Robert's eyes glistened. "Every day. Because while you were grieving me, I was grieving you." The words landed like a blow. Justin's lips parted, but nothing came out. He turned away, dragging a hand through his hair as though he could untangle the mess of emotions knotted inside him. Tyler, who had been standing silently, finally piped up. "You should sit down. You both look like you're gonna fall over." Justin let out a shaky laugh despite himself. He glanced at the boy, then back at Alice, who gave him an encouraging nod. Slowly, he crossed the room and sat across from Robert. Alice busied herself in the kitchen, giving them the illusion of privacy while still close enough to intervene if needed. She heard the low murmur of voices, the hesitant questions, the halting answers. Every so often the volume rose, Justin pressing, Robert defending, but each time it quieted again. By the time Alice returned with mugs of tea, the tension had shifted. Justin's shoulders were still stiff, his jaw still set, but his eyes no longer burned with anger. They burned with something more dangerous, the fragile beginnings of hope. He sipped his tea slowly, then set the mug down. "I don't know if I can just take your word for it," he said finally. "Not after everything. But I want to know the truth. All of it." Robert nodded. "That's all I ask." For the first time, Justin looked directly at Alice. "And you," he said, his tone softer now. "You've been taking care of him?" Alice hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just offered him a meal. A place to stay." Justin studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. Gratitude, maybe. Or guilt. Or both. He stood abruptly, straightening his jacket. "I'll be back," he said. "And next time I'll bring questions. Real ones." Then, without another word, he left, the door clicking shut behind him. The three of them sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing into the small room. Tyler finally broke it. "Well," he said, wide-eyed. "That was intense." Alice sank into a chair, her heart still pounding. Robert leaned forward, his face in his hands. "He came," he whispered almost to himself. "After all these years, he came." Alice reached across the table and laid her hand over his. "And he'll come again. You'll see." Robert nodded, but his eyes glistened with a mix of joy and fear. Because now that the door was open, the question wasn't whether Justin would walk through it. It was whether the truth waiting on the other side would set them free, or shatter them all. The visits became routine. At first, Justin came once a week, stiff and guarded, peppering Robert with pointed questions. Where had he been after the accident? What proof did he have? Why hadn't he fought harder to come back? Robert answered patiently, sometimes painfully. He told him about the forged documents, the accounts emptied behind his back, the way Karen had staged his disappearance and left him stripped of everything. He described the years of wandering, the nights on cold benches, the humiliation of begging for scraps while his son grew up believing him a monster. Justin listened, skeptical but searching. And then, one evening, he arrived with a folder under his arm. "I've been digging," he said, his voice low, eyes shadowed. He spread papers across Alice's small kitchen table. Bank statements, court records, property deeds. "I hired someone. And you were right. Everything you said. She drained your accounts, Dad. She even filed documents declaring you dead. And his voice broke. I signed them. I signed them because I believed her." Robert reached across the table, gripping his son's hand with surprising strength. "You didn't know. She made sure of that. You were a boy. You trusted your mother. No one can blame you for that." Justin bowed his head, shoulders trembling. For the first time in years, he let himself cry in his father's presence. Alice and Tyler watched quietly, their throats tight, as the wall between father and son finally began to crumble. Justin's visits grew longer, less formal. He stayed for dinner, sometimes laughing with Tyler over the boys' wild stories from school, sometimes lingering with Alice as she described her dreams of expanding the shop. There was a warmth to him that surprised her, a gentleness beneath the polished exterior. One evening, as Tyler pestered him with questions about business and stocks, Justin chuckled. "You know, you'd make a terrible CEO. You'd give away everything for free." Tyler grinned. "Sounds like Alice." Justin's eyes flicked to her then, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, maybe even admiration. But Karen didn't stay blind for long. The day she appeared at Alice's shop, she was almost unrecognizable. Perfectly styled hair, expensive heels, sunglasses that did little to mask the fury in her eyes. "So it's true," she hissed as she stepped inside, the doorbell chiming too brightly for the venom in her voice. "You found some little shoemaker to do your dirty work?" Alice straightened, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "No. I just listened when he had no one else." Karen's smile was thin and sharp. "You think you've won something here? That man is worthless. Always has been. And if Justin has half a brain, he'll see it eventually." Before Alice could respond, the door opened again. Justin stepped in, his gaze hard as steel. "Enough," he said. Karen froze. "I know what you did, Mother. I've seen the accounts. The lies. The forged papers. You took everything from him, from me. And you tried to bury him like he was nothing. But he's here. He's alive. And he's still more of a parent than you'll ever be." Karen's face twisted, but Justin didn't flinch. He moved past her, standing squarely beside Alice, as if to mark the line. "Don't come back," he said coldly. "Not here. Not to him. You've done enough." And just like that, the power shifted. Karen left in a storm of heels and rage, but her grip on their lives was broken. Weeks later, Robert packed a small suitcase. He was leaving with Justin, not because he wanted to abandon Alice and Tyler, but because his son needed him, and he finally had the chance to be the father he'd always longed to be. "I'll come back," he promised, hugging Alice tightly. "This is not goodbye. You're family now, too." She smiled through the sting in her eyes. "Go. Be with him. You both deserve it." Tyler clung to him like a grandchild, and Robert kissed the boy's forehead. "Keep learning, kid. You're going to go far." Life might have settled back into the old rhythm, but Justin had other plans. One afternoon, another SUV pulled up in front of the shop. This time, Justin stepped out with Robert at his side. He carried a folder and an envelope, and when he came inside, his expression was lighter than Alice had ever seen. "I've been thinking," Justin said, "about what you did. You didn't just give my father a place to stay. You gave him back his dignity. You gave me back my family. I can't repay that, but I can honor it." He placed the folder on the counter. Inside were documents, contracts, and figures that made Alice's head spin. "This is an investment proposal. I want to expand your shop. New equipment. A proper storefront in the city. Marketing. Staffing. Everything you need to turn this into a brand." Alice's breath caught. "Justin, I can't." "You can," he interrupted gently. "Because this isn't charity. It's a partnership. I believe in you, Alice. In what you're building. And so does my father." Robert nodded proudly. Alice looked from one to the other, then at Tyler, whose eyes were wide with excitement. She felt the weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every thread and stitch that had carried them here. And for the first time, the future didn't look impossible. It looked wide open. She swallowed hard, her voice thick. "All right. Let's build something." 6 months later, Alice's Cobbler shop wasn't just a shop anymore. It was a company, buzzing with employees, glowing with possibility. The little street-side repairs had given way to custom designs, orders shipping out daily, and a showroom that drew customers from across the city. Tyler wore his apprentice's apron with pride, juggling school and deliveries with the energy of a boy who finally believed the world had space for him. Robert, though he lived with Justin now, visited often, his laughter filling the shop as though it had always been home. And Justin, he was there too. Sometimes in the office, sometimes just leaning at the counter, talking with Alice in the quiet moments when the bustle slowed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights began to glow, Alice stepped outside with him. The air was cool, the streets humming with life. "You changed everything," Justin said softly, looking at her. Alice shook her head. "No. I just bought a man a burger and chips." He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. Sometimes that's all it takes. She looked up at the sky, remembering her grandfather's words, the lessons he stitched into her life. Every thread was an act of faith, every act of kindness a bridge. And now, surrounded by family she'd chosen and family she'd helped restore, Alice realized she hadn't just built shoes all these years. She'd built a life worth walking in. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.